So welcome to our afternoon session. Morning? Is it morning? It feels like afternoon. Is meaningful public awareness on the horizon? Can you divorce public awareness from public engagement? I'm Jeff Insko. I'm a board member of the Trust. I'm pleased to be on the panel with Sam Hall and Craig Pearson. I think I'm going to go first. I bet I'll be a little brief, so we might catch up on a little bit of our time. So I'm just going to dive in, I guess, if I can get this to work. Okay. So I'm actually going to try and stick fairly close to the two questions that are we generated to frame this panel. And so I'm just going to answer them forthrightly. So the first one is meaningful public awareness on the horizon, and the answer is no. I hate to be gloomy about it, but the reason I think the answer to the first question is probably no is because I think that RP 1162 is the guidelines that have been incorporated by reference for public awareness programs is fatally flawed and needs to be replaced with completely new guidelines that are generated through PHMSA's regular rulemaking process. The obvious problem with 1162 is that the guidelines it sets forth are entirely industry-driven. And public awareness isn't a matter of specialized technical knowledge as other rulemakings are that have been incorporated by reference. And it's certainly not an area of any particular expertise on the part of the American Petroleum Institute. And even more troubling from my point of view, as a member of the public, is that the guidelines established in 1162 were developed with virtually no input whatsoever from the very stakeholder groups that the programs are supposed to reach. And so, for example, none of the four target audiences identified by 1162 had any real substantive role in creating those recommended practices. And honestly, I don't see how anybody can think that's a very good idea. The other thing I would mention is that the programs themselves that the operators developed aren't available. And there's been a lot of discussion today in the last panel, for example, about transparency and trust. And this is yet another area where I think there's a missed opportunity to build some transparency and trust. As to the second question, for the, whoops, not that. What happened to my? I went there. Oh, can you divorce public awareness from public engagement? I think that the answer to that one is no also. And this no actually follows from the first one. And that is that one of the consequences of excluding the public from public engagement, from the development of public awareness guidelines, is that the industry winds up creating a kind of phantom public to stand in for the actual one that wasn't a part of the development of the guidelines. And I think it's a little bit like Plato's allegory of the cave, where the cave dwellers who can only see in front of them mistake the objects that are projected on the wall for actual horses and people, when in fact they're shadows of horses and people. And I guess that's kind of my thesis, that the public in public awareness is generally a kind of shadow public, not a real one. Okay, so to explain this, I have to back up a little bit. So I live along a pipeline, Enbridge's Line 6B, which I think has been rebranded now as Line 78. It runs through my backyard. There it is. This is what my backyard looked like before. But we bought this property in 2007, and in the 4 years before an Enbridge right-of-way agent knocked on my door to tell me that they were going to replace that pipeline, I never heard a single word from anyone in the company. I don't even recall receiving any mailings, although I might have, and I just don't remember, which I think itself is telling, because mailings are generally rather forgettable, except for maybe what Craig's going to show us today. And you know, even though when we bought the property, we knew there was a pipeline at the back of it. But I'm not proud to say that I couldn't have told you anything about that pipeline whatsoever. I couldn't have told you who owned it, what it transported, how old it was, the company's safety record, what to do if there was a problem, nothing at all. And then suddenly in 2011, the pipeline company became this ubiquitous presence in my life, and not a particularly positive presence in my life. And I learned more about them and their operations and the pipeline in my backyard than I ever wanted to learn. And I won't dwell on it, but I will just say that almost everything that I learned was not very positive. And so these encounters were actually my introduction to the company and the pipeline. They were how I became aware of them. So it didn't really matter what kinds of well-polished messages were being created by the Department of Public Awareness, off in some corporate office far away. The fact of the matter is the ways that right-of-way agents were interacting with me and my neighbors were de facto a part of they were the public awareness program for us. Which, for a minute, and I'll come back to that point in a minute, but that brings me back to 1162 and the kinds of messages that get created by those departments of public awareness off in distant corporate offices. So here's just an example. So while actual interactions with actual members of the public are taking place in actual communities, somewhere off in the distance, PR people are crafting public awareness campaigns for what I think is that shadow or imaginary public that in some ways is the product of the guidelines established in 1162. And my point, what I mean there is that these guidelines shape the way that public awareness campaigns proceed. And so here's an example from the introduction, that pipeline operators are an important factor in establishing communications and providing information necessary to help the public understand, that pipelines are the major transportation system for petroleum products and natural gas in the United States, how pipelines function, and the public's responsibilities to help prevent damage to pipelines. And partly I'm interested in the order of these things, that to help the public understand that pipelines are the major transportation system for petroleum products and natural gas. And just to give you an example of how that element is the one that seems to be emphasized, or the framing device for public awareness, it's there in the objectives of 1162 as well. Those objectives are to increase the public's understanding of the role of pipelines in transporting energy, and to help the public understand that while pipeline accidents are possible, they are a relatively safe mode of transportation, and that pipeline operators undertake a variety of measures to prevent accidents, et cetera. These kinds of statements are commercials rather than informative in terms of how the public can help enhance pipeline safety. And so, but it's there, it's everywhere. This sort of thing is everywhere. So here's from the Insko website, and my old eyes can't actually read my own slide, but you know, pipelines are required to provide pipeline awareness programs. And then the first bullet point is the purpose, need, and reliability of underground pipelines. And Inga's public awareness effort is this website they developed called America's Energy Link. And again, what this shows is, this is Inga describing to us how important and great and wonderful pipelines are for us. And that emphasis on what pipelines are for and how important energy is to us finds its way into the pipeline awareness programs of operators. So just to give you an example of this is from the website of the operator that is in my backyard. And again, pipelines are one of the safest, most efficient, and most reliable ways to transport energy resources. And by the way, I should add that, like the website, Enver's website, it's full of great information. It's slick, it's well designed, it's super informative. But this is the first thing that one's confronted with. And here's another example. Here's one of their brochures for pipeline safety. And the most prominent thing on the page, in the largest font, is the statement about how life takes energy, et cetera. And that actually is taken directly from Enbridge's advertising campaign. And so the point here, the thing that I'm emphasizing, is that there's a conflation of public relations or marketing with public awareness. And those are two very, very different things. And I actually think that this is a problem. It's actually counterproductive in terms of public awareness. And let me just say a word or two why. First, I think, from my perspective, it's frankly insulting and condescending that I'm not, in terms of that shadow public that I'm describing, I'm not sure who these people are that don't know that pipelines transport energy to our homes and that we rely upon energy in our everyday lives. Like I'm not sure who that public is. I don't think it's a real public. I think it's a shadow public. The second thing is that these kinds of statements are commercials, and we're bombarded with commercials all the time, everywhere we turn. And when people are confronted with commercials, they tend to stop listening, which is one of the reasons I think that most of the mailings that we receive as landowners, for example, are not very helpful. If the first thing that I see is life takes energy and pipelines are a relatively safe mode, I'm already throwing it in the trash. And then the third thing is maybe the most important thing, and that is that I actually think that these kinds of messages are contradictory and for that reason counterproductive. So on the one hand, operators through these kinds of public awareness statements are essentially telling us that like everything's all right, that we don't have to worry, that pipelines are generally safe and it's rare that they have incidents and so forth. In other words, the message is don't worry, you don't have to be concerned, we got this. And yet on the other hand, you're trying to get them to take an interest in what might happen if there is an incident. So like I wonder what would happen if instead of that kind of message, the message was, and Bernie Goldstein was great in talking about this yesterday, like what if the messages were about the realities of risk assessment? You know, like here's the company's safety record and things, and here's the safety record of the specific pipeline on your property. Those are the kinds of things that people want to know, and those are the kinds of things that are apt to get people interested instead of irritated. Okay, so and the thing is that if that doesn't, and by the way, just at the Chicago Public Awareness Working Group workshop, more kind of information that's difficult to obtain are the results, the kind of concrete results of the public awareness programs that operators develop. But Karen Gentili did provide a kind of general overview of some of the inspection reports. And I just wanted to point to one observation that she makes which kind of gets at some of what I'm describing, and that's the third bullet point, is that what they found is that there tends to be a kind of one-size-fits-all public awareness program, and that kind of program doesn't work. And again, I think that's what I mean when I say that the public imagined by public awareness programs tends to be this kind of phantom shadow public. It's a sort of hollow abstraction, rather than recognizing that the public is made up of actual human beings living in specific communities with specific kinds of interests and concerns and diverse perspectives. And I'm getting that. And so the thing is that as long as the public awareness programs are built on a model that is essentially marketing or public relations, actual public awareness is coming from elsewhere. And I mean, I think we all know what that actual public awareness is. It comes from other kinds of public engagement. It comes from, you know, federal marshals showing up on your property with assault rifles, or it comes from images of pipeline operators who are building pipelines 10 feet away from people's homes, or it comes from, you know, snarling dogs with bloody chops who are attacking protesters, or militarized police. They're preventing peaceful protests. That those things, that kind of public engagement, and it is public engagement, is public awareness. And so until public awareness programs kind of get out of the distant corporate offices and become a part of every interaction that pipeline operators have with people, these are the more powerful messages that are going to be the takeaway. And I think in lots of ways they are counterproductive to public safety. And so I tried to just sort of state all of that to kind of sum up in the form of a basic set of propositions, which are public relations is not public awareness. Public awareness is public engagement. So that's all. Thank you.